The year was 1943. The air was thick with the scent of fear and gunpowder, a grim perfume clinging to every corner of a world consumed by war. In the quiet, unassuming corridors of Allied intelligence, a plan was being forged, a desperate gamble against overwhelming odds. It was a mission so audacious, so seemingly impossible, that it earned a whispered moniker among the few who knew its true nature: Operation Chimera. But what if a mission, from its very inception, was never meant to succeed? What if its purpose wasn't victory but something far more chilling? Prepare to delve into the shadows of a forgotten history, a tale of sacrifice, deception, and the chilling truth behind a mission designed for failure. If you're intrigued by the untold stories of courage and conspiracy that lurk in the annals of war, consider subscribing to our channel. We uncover the mysteries that history tries to bury. Our story begins with Captain Alistair Finch, a man whose quiet demeanor belied a mind of sharp tactical brilliance and an unwavering sense of duty. He was a cartographer by trade, a man who understood the subtle contours of terrain and the deadly implications of a misplaced line on a map. But the war had swept him from the quiet solitude of his charts into the brutal reality of combat. Finch had seen the horrors up close, the mud-soaked trenches, the desperate charges, the hollow eyes of men who had seen too much. He carried the weight of those memories, a silent burden that etched lines of premature age onto his face. He was chosen for Operation Chimera, not for his combat prowess, though he possessed it, but for his meticulous attention to detail and his reputation for unwavering loyalty. He was a man who followed orders, even when those orders led into the heart of darkness. The objective of Operation Chimera, as it was presented to Finch and his hand-picked team, was deceptively simple: infiltrate a heavily fortified German research facility deep within the Bavarian Alps, retrieve vital intelligence pertaining to a new, highly destructive weapon, and neutralize the facility's key personnel. The target, codenamed Valhalla, was rumored to be the birthplace of a revolutionary rocket propulsion system, a threat that could shift the tide of the war irrevocably in favor of the Axis powers. The stakes were immeasurable. The mission briefing, held in a dimly lit bunker beneath London, was a masterclass in controlled information. Maps were spread across a long table, glowing faintly under the single bare bulb. Diagrams of Valhalla, meticulously rendered from aerial reconnaissance, detailed its layers of defenses: barbed wire, machine gun nests, anti-aircraft batteries. Each detail presented a new hurdle, a new layer of impossibility. Finch sat at the head of the table, his gaze fixed on the flickering candlelight, listening as Colonel Harding, a man whose steely eyes held the weight of countless strategic decisions, outlined the plan. Harding's voice was a low rumble devoid of emotion, each word carefully chosen. He spoke of the importance of the mission, the potential for ultimate victory if they succeeded. But beneath the surface of his calm delivery, Finch detected a subtle tremor, a hint of something unspoken. He was a keen observer, a trait that had served him well in both cartography and combat. He noticed the way Harding avoided eye contact when discussing the extraction plan, the vague assurances about air support that seemed to evaporate into the stale air of the bunker. A seed of doubt, tiny yet persistent, began to sprout in Finch's mind. His team consisted of 3 other men, each a specialist in their own right. Sargento Moore Elias Thorne, a hulking Scotsman with hands like shovels and a reputation for unmatched demolitions expertise. Thorne was a man of few words but immense presence, his loyalty to Finch forged in the crucible of previous desperate engagements. Next was Cabo Lena Schmidt, an enigmatic German-born operative with impeccable language skills and an uncanny ability to blend into any environment. Her past was shrouded in secrecy, whispered rumors of anti-Nazi resistance work before the war. Her presence on the team was a testament to her unique and invaluable skills, but also a source of quiet tension among some of the more seasoned, less trusting soldiers. Finally, there was Soldado de Primera Clase Arthur Hayes, a young, eager communications specialist, barely out of his teens, whose wiry frame belied a sharp mind and an unwavering optimism. Hayes was the team's lifeline to the outside world, or so he believed. The training for Operation Chimera was brutal, relentless. They practiced infiltration techniques in mock-up facilities, scaled icy rock faces in the Scottish Highlands, and endured grueling forced marches through unforgiving terrain. Every scenario was designed to push them to their limits, to prepare them for the unimaginable challenges that awaited them in the Bavarian Alps. Finch watched his team, observing their strengths and weaknesses, their reactions under pressure. He saw Thorne's unwavering resolve, Schmidt's cool precision, Hayes's youthful enthusiasm. He also saw the growing apprehension in their eyes as the reality of their mission began to sink in. They were being prepared for a suicide mission, though no one dared to utter the words aloud. As the day of their departure drew closer, the unspoken questions grew louder in Finch's mind. Why was the intelligence so fragmented? Why were the escape routes so poorly defined, almost an afterthought? And why, despite the critical nature of the objective, did the support infrastructure feel so thin? He tried to voice his concerns to Colonel Harding, subtly at first, then more directly. Harding, however, merely offered vague reassurances, attributing the perceived deficiencies to the inherent secrecy and high-risk nature of the operation. "Loose ends, Captain," Harding had said, "are a luxury we cannot afford in this war." But Finch knew better. Loose ends were often the unraveling of a carefully constructed lie. The journey to the drop zone was a blur of cramped transport planes and hushed whispers. The air grew colder, the landscape below transforming into a jagged tapestry of snow-capped peaks and dark winding valleys. The silence in the plain was heavy, punctuated only by the rhythmic drone of the engines and the occasional rustle of equipment. Each man and woman on that plane was grappling with their own fears, their own understanding of what lay ahead. Finch caught Thorne's gaze across the dim cabin. The big Scot simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the shared burden. Schmidt sat stoically, her eyes closed, her face a mask of serene determination. Hayes, ever the optimist, was meticulously checking his radio equipment, a nervous energy radiating from him. The jump itself was a plunge into an inky black abyss. The wind howled past their ears, a deafening roar that swallowed all other sounds. Finch felt the familiar jolt of the parachute opening, the sudden deceleration, and then the slow, silent descent. Below, the Bavarian Alps were a formidable, silent sentinel, their snow-covered peaks gleaming faintly under the distant starlight. Landing was jarring, the snow deep and unforgiving. They quickly gathered their equipment, the cold biting at their exposed skin. The air was thin, crisp, and carried the faint metallic scent of something distant and dangerous. Their trek through the mountains was arduous. Days blurred into nights marked by the relentless climb, the biting wind, and the constant threat of discovery. They moved like ghosts, leaving no trace, their movements precise and practiced. Thorne, with his immense strength, often carried the heaviest loads, clearing paths through dense snowdrifts. Schmidt, with her uncanny sense of direction and knowledge of the local dialect, navigated them through treacherous passes and avoided patrols. Hayes, despite his youth, proved to be remarkably resilient, his radio equipment carefully protected from the elements. Finch, ever vigilant, led the way, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, his ears attuned to the subtle sounds of the mountain. He felt the weight of his command, the lives of these three individuals resting squarely on his shoulders. As they drew closer to Valhalla, the signs of its presence became more pronounced. Patrolled roads, hidden checkpoints, the distant thrum of machinery echoing through the valleys. The air grew heavier, a sense of foreboding settling over them like a shroud. They established a hidden observation post overlooking the facility, a precarious perch on a windswept ridge. From there, they could see Valhalla in its entirety, a sprawling complex of reinforced concrete buildings, bristling with anti-aircraft guns and searchlights that cut through the darkness like accusing fingers. It was a fortress, impenetrable. Finch spent hours observing the facility, meticulously noting patrol routes, guard changes, and the subtle rhythms of its operations. He recorded every detail in his small waterproof notebook, his cartographer's eye missing nothing. The more he observed, the more the pieces of the puzzle began to shift, to form a different, more disturbing picture. The defenses were not just formidable, they were excessive, almost theatrical. It was as if Valhalla was designed to be seen, to project an image of impregnable strength rather than to truly hide its secrets. And then there was the sheer scale of the operation within. Too many personnel for a research facility, too much activity for a secret weapon project still in its experimental stages. One evening, as the moon cast long ghostly shadows across the snow, Finch overheard a radio transmission. Hayes, struggling with the static, managed to pull a few fragmented words from the air. It was a German broadcast, but not a military one. It spoke of a new, wonder weapon, a miracle of engineering, and hinted at its imminent unveiling. The tone was triumphant, almost boastful. Finch felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. This wasn't intelligence gathering, this was something else. He confronted Schmidt. "Lena," he said, his voice low, "what do you know about Valhalla?" "Really know?" Schmidt's eyes, usually so guarded, held a flicker of something akin to fear. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Rumors, Captain. Whispers among the KM. Resistance. They say Valhalla is not just a research facility. They say it's a decoy, a grand illusion." Finch felt a jolt. A decoy. It made a chilling kind of sense. The excessive defenses, the public radio broadcasts, it was all designed to draw attention, to project an image that was not entirely true. But if Valhalla was a decoy, what was its true purpose? And what was their mission, if not to retrieve intelligence about a weapon that might not even exist in the way they had been told? The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the picture they formed was far more sinister than he had ever imagined. He remembered Colonel Harding's evasiveness, the poorly defined escape routes, the lack of genuine support. They weren't meant to succeed. They were meant to be a distraction, a sacrifice. Finch called his team together, the biting wind whipping around them. He laid out his suspicions, the fragmented evidence, the unsettling implications. Thorne listened, his face grim, his silence a testament to his understanding. Hayes, his youthful optimism finally shattered, looked utterly bewildered, then enraged. Schmidt, however, merely nodded, her eyes holding a knowing sadness. "I suspected as much, Captain," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "The Resistance has heard tales of such operations, misdirection, sacrificial lambs. The realization hit them like a physical blow. Their lives were expendable, a pawn in a larger game of deception. Their mission was not to cripple the enemy, but to divert their attention, to draw their resources to a false target while the true threat, or perhaps the true objective, remained hidden elsewhere. The question then became, what was the real mission they were distracting from? Finch knew they couldn't simply abandon their post. They were too deep, too committed. And even if Valhalla was a decoy, there was still the very real threat of discovery, of capture, of death. But their objective had changed. It was no longer about retrieving intelligence or neutralizing personnel. It was about survival, and perhaps about unmasking the truth. They decided to proceed with the infiltration, but with a modified objective, to gather definitive proof that Valhalla was indeed a decoy, and to uncover whatever true purpose it served. They would move cautiously, observe everything, and record every detail. Thorne began preparing his demolitions, not for a full assault, but for creating diversions, for opening escape routes, for ensuring their survival. Schmidt meticulously reviewed the facility blueprints, searching for anomalies, for inconsistencies that would betray its true nature. Hayes, his initial rage now replaced by a cold resolve, focused on adapting his radio equipment to intercept new frequencies, to listen for anything that would reveal the deeper conspiracy. Under the cover of a moonless night, they made their move. The infiltration was a ballet of silent movement, each step carefully placed, each breath held. Thorn expertly disarmed tripwires and bypassed pressure plates. Schmidt, a shadow among shadows, disabled security cameras and unlocked reinforced doors with practiced ease. Hayes, a ghost in the network, tapped into the facility's internal communications, listening, always listening. Finch, his senses heightened, led them deeper into the labyrinthine corridors of Valhalla. What they found inside was not what they expected. The research labs were mostly empty, filled with outdated equipment and meticulously staged scientific displays. The weapon prototypes were crude mock-ups, more theatrical props than functional devices. The key personnel were mostly administrative staff, their offices filled with mundane paperwork, not blueprints for world-ending machines. Valhalla was a stage, and they were the unsuspecting actors. But then, deep within the facility, in a section that appeared to be an underground bunker, they discovered something truly disturbing. It wasn't a weapon, but a vast network of communication arrays, powerful transmitters humming with latent energy. And beside them, stacks of meticulously crafted disinformation pamphlets, propaganda designed to spread fear and division among the Allied forces. Valhalla was not just a decoy, it was a psychological warfare hub, a factory of lies designed to sow discord and undermine morale. Its true purpose was to manipulate, to weaken the enemy from within, while simultaneously drawing attention to a non-existent superweapon. As Finch examined the disinformation materials, a chilling realization dawned on him. The information they were sent to retrieve was not about a weapon, but about the very nature of the deception itself. They were meant to discover the wonder weapon and report it back, inadvertently spreading the enemy's propaganda, validating the lie. Their mission was not to retrieve intelligence, but to be the intelligence, to become unwitting conduits of enemy disinformation, and their failure was designed to be a tragic, heroic story that would further amplify the enemy's false narrative. The air around them grew heavy with the weight of this revelation. They had been used, manipulated, sacrificed. The anger that surged through Finch was cold, precise. He looked at his team, their faces illuminated by the dim glow of Hayes's modified radio display, and saw the same understanding, the same betrayal reflected in their eyes. They were not just soldiers. They were pawns in a cynical game. Thorn, his face a mask of grim determination, began to plant charges, not to destroy the propaganda, but to cripple the communication arrays. "They want a show, Captain?" he rumbled, his voice low and dangerous. "We'll give them a show." Schmidt, her usual composure fractured by the enormity of the deception, began meticulously copying data from the propaganda leaflets, proof of the enemy's true objective. Hayes, his fingers flying across his radio, began transmitting a coded message not to Allied command but to a frequency he had discovered, a frequency used by a small, independent network of resistance fighters. He was sending a warning, a desperate plea for the truth to be heard. As Thorn finished planting the charges, a sudden alarm blared through the facility. They had been discovered. Footsteps echoed in the distance, growing louder, closer. The Germans were closing in. "Time to go," Finch commanded, his voice sharp with urgency. They moved quickly, retracing their steps, the sounds of approaching soldiers now a relentless drumbeat against their ears. Thorn detonated a series of diversionary charges, sending plumes of smoke and debris through the corridors, momentarily disorienting their pursuers. The escape was a desperate scramble. They fought their way through corridors now filled with German soldiers, their rifles spitting fire in the dim light. Thorn, a force of nature, protected their rear, his heavy fists and combat knife a blur of lethal efficiency. Schmidt, her movements fluid and precise, provided covering fire, her aim deadly. Hayes, clutching his precious radio, kept pace, his survival instincts kicking in. Finch, leading the charge, navigated them through the chaos, his cartographer's mind mapping their escape route even under intense fire. They burst out into the biting cold of the Bavarian night, the alarms still screaming behind them, searchlights sweeping across the snow. The mountain air, once a symbol of freedom, now felt like a cold, indifferent witness to their desperate flight. They ran, their lungs burning, the sound of German pursuit echoing behind them. They knew their chances of survival were slim. They were deep behind enemy lines, exhausted, outgunned, and now exposed. As they scrambled up a treacherous slope, a sudden burst of machine gun fire erupted from a ridge above them. Hayes, caught in the open, cried out, a sharp, choked sound, and crumpled to the ground, his radio still clutched in his hand. Finch, Thorne, and Schmidt immediately returned fire, but it was too late. Hayes was gone, a casualty of a mission that was never meant to succeed, a victim of a truth too dangerous to be revealed. Thorne roared in anguish, a guttural sound of grief and fury, and charged the ridge, a one-man army seeking vengeance. Finch, his heart heavy with loss, knew they couldn't afford to stop. They had to get the truth out. They continued their desperate climb, the sounds of the WWII battle fading behind them, replaced by the relentless pursuit of German patrols. They were hunted, relentlessly. The mountains, once their sanctuary, now felt like a vast, unforgiving prison. Days bled into nights once more, marked by hunger, exhaustion, and the constant threat of capture. They moved like wounded animals, driven by a singular purpose: to expose the truth about Valhalla, about Operation Chimera, about the betrayal that had cost them so much. They finally reached a remote mountain village, a place known to Schmidt through her resistance contacts. It was a small, isolated community, its inhabitants wary but sympathetic to their plight. They found refuge in a hidden cellar, their bodies aching, their spirits bruised, but their resolve unbroken. Schmidt, using her contacts, began to arrange for their safe passage to Switzerland, a neutral territory where they could finally tell their story. But the Germans were relentless. The village was raided, their sanctuary compromised. In the ensuing chaos, Thorne, ever the protector, drew the enemy's attention, engaging them in a brutal, desperate fight, buying Finch and Schmidt precious time to escape. Finch heard Thorne's last defiant roar as he fell, a hero in a mission of deceit. The weight of the sacrifices, the sheer senselessness of it all, threatened to crush Finch. He and Schmidt, the last two survivors, fled into the unforgiving night, leaving behind the echoes of battle and the ghosts of their fallen comrades. Their journey to Switzerland was a desperate race against time and pursuit. They faced icy passes, relentless patrols, and the constant threat of betrayal. But they pressed on, fueled by the memory of Hayes and Thorne, by the burning desire to expose the truth. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, they crossed the border, exhausted but alive. In Switzerland, Finch and Schmidt were debriefed by Allied intelligence officers, men who listened with growing disbelief, then dawning horror, as they recounted their tale. They presented the evidence they had collected: the copied disinformation pamphlets, Hayes's intercepted transmissions, their detailed observations of Valhalla. The proof was undeniable. Valhalla was a sham, a grand deception, and Operation Chimera was a calculated sacrifice. The true purpose of their mission had been to validate a lie, to spread enemy propaganda, and to die doing it. The revelation sent shockwaves through the highest echelons of Allied command. The implications were staggering. If the enemy was capable of such elaborate deceptions, what else were they hiding? What other truths had been twisted? What other sacrifices had been made in the name of a war that was far more complex and morally ambiguous than anyone had dared to imagine? The shame of the betrayal, the deliberate sacrifice of brave soldiers, was a bitter pill to swallow. Captain Alistair Finch and Cabo Lena Schmidt, the sole survivors of Operation Chimera, became reluctant heroes, their story a chilling testament to the brutal realities of wartime strategy and the moral compromises made in the pursuit of victory. Their testimony led to a complete reevaluation of Allied intelligence gathering, a deeper scrutiny of enemy propaganda, and a renewed understanding of the psychological battlefield. Valhalla, the decoy facility, continued to operate for a time, its purpose now known, its power diminished. The wonder weapon it was supposed to house remained a phantom, a ghost, in the machine of wartime deception. But the story of Operation Chimera, of the brave men and women sent on a mission designed to fail, was largely buried, deemed too sensitive, too damaging to morale, to be widely known. It became a whispered legend among the intelligence community, a cautionary tale of the dark side of espionage. Finch, forever changed by his experiences, never fully recovered from the betrayal. He carried the weight of Hayes and Thorne's sacrifice, a constant reminder of the price of deception. He continued to serve, his tactical brilliance now tempered by a profound cynicism, a deeper understanding of the shadows that lurked beneath the surface of every command. Schmidt, too, found it difficult to reconcile with the truth. She returned to her resistance work. Her resolve hardened, her trust in authority irrevocably fractured. The legacy of Operation Chimera is not one of heroic victory, but of profound moral ambiguity. It is a stark reminder that in the fog of war, truth is often the first casualty, and that sometimes the greatest enemy lies not across the battlefield, but within the very commands we are sworn to obey. The men and women of Operation Chimera were sentenced to fail, their lives a deliberate sacrifice in a complex game of shadows and lies. Their story, though largely forgotten, serves as a chilling testament to the hidden costs of war, a mystery solved at a terrible price. What price are we willing to pay for victory? What truths are we willing to bury? What sacrifices are we willing to make, even those that involve our own? The answers, as the tale of Operation Chimera reveals, are often found in the darkest corners of human ambition, where heroism and betrayal become indistinguishable. If this story has resonated with you, if it has made you question the narratives we are presented with, then join our community. Subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and share this video. Let's continue to uncover these forgotten histories, to shine a light on the mysteries that still haunt the annals of war, and to remember those whose sacrifices, both seen and unseen, shaped the world we live in today. The insidious nature of Operation Chimera wasn't merely in the calculated sacrifice of its operatives, but in the meticulous construction of a narrative designed to obscure that sacrifice. The official reports, meticulously crafted by the same architects of the betrayal, painted a picture of a daring, if ultimately unsuccessful mission. They highlighted the bravery of Hayes and Thorne, the tenacity of their team, and the unforeseen circumstances that led to their demise. But the unforeseen circumstances were, in truth, the carefully orchestrated collapse of their support, the deliberate withholding of critical intelligence, and the calculated exposure to an overwhelming enemy force. This manipulation of truth extended far beyond the immediate aftermath of the operation. The intelligence community, a vast network of information and disinformation, became an unwitting accomplice in perpetuating the lie. Analysts, poring over sanitized reports, drew conclusions that reinforced the fabricated narrative. Junior officers, eager to learn from past operations, studied the lessons learned from Chimera, internalizing a false understanding of tactical failure rather than strategic betrayal. The institutional memory itself was corrupted, a cancerous growth of falsity spreading through the veins of an organization built on the premise of truth. Finch, in his later years, became a ghost in the machine. His tactical brilliance, once celebrated, was now viewed with a wary respect. He was the man who saw too much, knew too much. His cynical pronouncements, often veiled in dark humor, were dismissed as the ramblings of a man scarred by war. But those who truly listened, those who had seen glimpses of the same shadows, recognized the truth in his words. He would often speak of ghosts in the wires, referring not to literal spirits but to the spectral presence of untold truths that haunted the communication lines, the intelligence reports, the very fabric of their operations. He developed an uncanny ability to sniff out deception, to see the cracks in even the most perfectly constructed narratives. This made him both invaluable and dangerous. Invaluable, because he could identify enemy disinformation with chilling accuracy. Dangerous, because he could just as easily expose the disinformation propagated by his own side. Schmidt, after her return to the resistance, channeled her rage and disillusionment into a fierce dedication to truth. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, the power of a lie to dismantle not just a mission, but the very spirit of a people. Her resistance cell, once focused on direct sabotage, shifted its emphasis to intelligence gathering and counter-propaganda. They became adept at dissecting official communiques, identifying inconsistencies and disseminating alternative narratives to the populace. She recognized that the true battlefield was often in the minds of the people, and that controlling the flow of information was as crucial as controlling territory. Her operatives, trained by her, learned to read between the lines, to question every official pronouncement, to see the hidden agendas behind every carefully worded statement. They became the antithesis of Operation Chimera's architects, dedicated to unveiling the truth rather than burying it. The psychological toll on those involved, even indirectly, was immense. The lingering sense of unease, the unspoken questions, the subtle shifts in institutional culture, these were the unseen wounds of Chimera. Trust, the bedrock of any effective intelligence operation, was subtly eroded. Officers began to second-guess their superiors, to scrutinize orders with a newfound skepticism. The camaraderie, once a defining characteristic of the intelligence community, became tinged with suspicion. Who could you truly trust when the very foundations of truth had been so deliberately undermined? This internal fracturing, while not immediately catastrophic, had long-term consequences. It fostered an environment where critical thinking could devolve into paranoia, where healthy skepticism could morph into outright insubordination. The architects of Chimera, in their pursuit of a strategic victory, had inadvertently sown the seeds of internal discord, a slow-burning fire that would continue to smolder in the years to come. Think of the fog of war not just as the chaos of battle, but as the deliberate obscuring of information, the intentional creation of ambiguity. Operation Chimera was a masterclass in manufacturing fog, not for the enemy, but for their own side. It was a preemptive strike against truth, a calculated act of self-deception designed to achieve a specific outcome, regardless of the human cost. The victory, if it could be called that, was a Pyrrhic one, purchased at the expense of moral integrity and institutional trust. The chilling aspect of Chimera is its replicability. How many other Operation Chimeras have unfolded throughout history, their true nature buried under layers of official narratives and classified documents? How many brave men and women have been sent to their deaths, their sacrifices meticulously framed as unavoidable tragedies, when in reality they were deliberate expendables in a larger, darker game? Consider the broader implications for historical narratives. History, they say, is written by the victors. But what if the victors themselves are complicit in fabricating that history? What if the official accounts we consume, the textbooks we read, the documentaries we watch, are merely polished versions of carefully constructed lies designed to protect reputations, justify actions, and maintain power structures? Operation Chimera forces us to question the very basis of our understanding of past events. It demands that we look beyond the surface to interrogate the narratives, to seek out the dissenting voices, the forgotten perspectives. The tale of Chimera is not just a story of a single mission, it's a parable about the nature of power and the seductive allure of expediency. It illustrates how easily ethical boundaries can be blurred, how quickly the ends can begin to justify the most reprehensible means. When the stakes are high, when the perceived threat is existential, the temptation to sacrifice principles for perceived advantage becomes almost irresistible. And once that line is crossed, it becomes easier to cross it again and again, each time rationalizing the moral compromise with increasing ease. The institutional memory of Operation Chimera, while suppressed, never entirely vanished. It existed in the quiet glances between veteran officers, in the hushed conversations over late-night drinks, in the unspoken understanding that some truths were too dangerous to articulate. Finch, in his later years, became a sort of oracle for those who sought answers. He wouldn't directly reveal the full extent of the betrayal, bound by oaths and a deep-seated weariness. But he would offer cryptic clues, leading questions, subtle nudges that allowed others to piece together fragments of the truth for themselves. He knew that outright revelation would be met with denial and reprisal, but planting seeds of doubt, encouraging independent thought, that was a more potent form of resistance. Schmidt, on the other hand, was more direct. Her resistance network published anonymous pamphlets, smuggled information across borders, and meticulously documented every piece of evidence they could gather. They understood that while the immediate impact might be limited, the long-term effect of accumulating and preserving these hidden histories would be profound. They were building an alternative archive, a counter-narrative that would one day challenge the official version of events. She believed that the truth, like water, would eventually find its way through even the most formidable barriers. The ethical dilemma presented by Operation Chimera is a profound one. Is there ever a scenario where the deliberate sacrifice of one's own operatives under false pretenses can be justified for a greater strategic gain? The architects of Chimera clearly believed so. They operated under the utilitarian principle, the greatest good for the greatest number. But whose good were they truly serving? And at what cost to the moral fabric of their organization and indeed their society? This story challenges us to consider the moral compass of leadership in times of crisis. When leaders are faced with impossible choices, when the pressures are immense, how do they navigate the treacherous waters of ethical decision-making? Do they prioritize the perceived necessity of the moment, even if it means sacrificing fundamental principles? Or do they hold firm to a moral code, even if it means potentially jeopardizing a strategic objective? The answers, as Chimera demonstrates, are rarely clear-cut, and the consequences, both immediate and long-lasting, can be devastating. The legacy of Chimera also extends to the families of the fallen. They were told stories of heroism and sacrifice, of men who died bravely in the line of duty. They grieved for heroes, never knowing that their loved ones were, in essence, sacrificial pawns. The deception perpetuated their pain, denying them the true closure that comes with understanding. Their grief was built on a foundation of lies, a silent wound that festered beneath the surface of their lives. Imagine the profound shock, the devastating betrayal, should the full truth ever come to light for them. It would not only reopen old wounds but inflict new ones, shattering their understanding of their loved ones' final moments and the organizations they served. This is why the truth, however painful, is ultimately essential. It is the only path to genuine healing, to true accountability, and to preventing such atrocities from repeating. The story of Operation Chimera is a call to vigilance, a reminder that the pursuit of power, unchecked by ethical considerations, can lead to the darkest corners of human behavior. It compels us to question, to investigate, and to demand transparency from those who wield authority. The narrative we've explored today is not just a historical recounting, it's a living, breathing warning. It resonates in every news cycle, every political statement, every official report that demands our unquestioning acceptance. Are we, as a society, falling prey to our own Operation Chimeras, accepting narratives that mask deeper, more unsettling truths? Are we, by our complacency, becoming complicit in the perpetuation of these hidden costs of conflict? The journey to uncover these forgotten histories is rarely easy. It requires courage, perseverance, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. But it is a journey we must undertake, for in the shadows of the past lie the lessons for our future. By understanding the sacrifices, both seen and unseen, by questioning the narratives, and by demanding accountability, we can hope to build a world where heroism is not indistinguishable from betrayal, and where the price of victory is not measured in the deliberate destruction of moral integrity. This is not merely a story to be consumed, it is a challenge to be embraced. A challenge to think critically, to seek truth, and to remember that the human cost of conflict extends far beyond the battlefield. It encompasses the psychological scars, the erosion of trust, and the deliberate obfuscation of reality. Join us in this ongoing exploration. Let's continue to shine a light on these mysteries, because only by understanding the darkness can we truly appreciate the light. The story of Operation Chimera, in its chilling complexity, reminds us that the quest for truth is an eternal one, and that the shadows of the past continue to shape the world we inhabit today. We must never stop asking, what price are we willing to pay for victory? What truths are we willing to bury? And what sacrifices are we willing to make, even those that involve our own? The answers, as the tale of Operation Chimera reveals, are often found in the darkest corners of human ambition, where heroism and betrayal become indistinguishable. If this story has resonated with you, if it has made you question the narratives we are presented with, then join our community. Subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and share this video. Let's continue to uncover these forgotten histories, to shine a light on the mysteries that still haunt the annals of war, and to remember those whose sacrifices, both seen and unseen, shaped the world we live in today. The fight for truth is never over. The echoes of Operation Chimera reverberate through time. Stark reminder that history is not a static monolith but a living, breathing entity, constantly reinterpreted and, at times, deliberately rewritten. Our exploration into this shadowy chapter of clandestine warfare has, we hope, ignited within you a similar urgency to peel back the layers of official narratives and confront the uncomfortable truths that lie beneath. It's not enough to simply consume information. We must actively interrogate it, to question the motives of those who present it, and to seek out the voices that have been silenced. Consider the prevailing narratives surrounding military operations, especially those deemed successful. Often, the focus remains squarely on strategic victories, technological advancements, and the valor of those on the front lines. But what about the invisible casualties? The psychological toll on those who executed morally ambiguous orders, the erosion of their humanity in the pursuit of a greater, often ill-defined, good. Operation Chimera offers a chilling glimpse into this hidden cost, where the lines between duty and depravity blurred, and the very souls of its participants became collateral damage. We've touched upon the deliberate obfuscation of reality, a tactic as old as conflict itself. In the age of information, this becomes even more insidious. Propaganda, once a crude tool, has evolved into a sophisticated art form, capable of shaping perceptions, manipulating emotions, and ultimately, dictating what we believe to be true. The architects of Operation Chimera understood this implicitly. They didn't just fight a war on the battlefield, they waged a parallel war for control of the narrative, ensuring that their version of events would be etched into history, while the inconvenient truths were buried under layers of secrecy and official denials. This brings us to a crucial point: the responsibility of the individual. In the face of overwhelming state power and carefully constructed narratives, it can feel daunting to challenge the status quo. Yet it is precisely this individual courage that can dismantle the edifice of lies. Think of the whistleblowers, the investigative journalists, the historians who dedicate their lives to unearthing forgotten truths. Their work is often thankless, dangerous, and met with fierce resistance, but it is essential. They are the ones who dare to ask the uncomfortable questions, to expose the hidden machinations, and to remind us that even in the darkest corners, a flicker of truth can still ignite. Operation Chimera, with its intricate web of deception and moral compromise, serves as a powerful case study in this regard. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that sometimes the heroes we celebrate are merely pawns in a larger, more sinister game. And conversely, those branded as traitors might in fact be the ones who dared to uphold a higher moral code, even at immense personal cost. The story of Lieutenant Anya Sharma, whose internal conflict and ultimate defection we've hinted at, embodies this very dilemma. Her journey from loyal operative to a voice of dissent is a testament to the enduring power of conscience, even when pitted against the formidable machinery of state secrecy. Imagine the internal battles she must have fought, the quiet agonizing over every order, every decision that pushed her further away from her own ethical compass. Her eventual choice, though shrouded in mystery, speaks volumes about the unbearable weight of complicity. The psychological scars of such operations are not merely academic, they are deeply human. The erosion of trust, not just in institutions, but in one's own judgment, can be a lifelong burden. The participants of Operation Chimera, even those who believed they were serving a just cause, were irrevocably changed. The constant need for secrecy, the blurring of moral lines, the performance of actions that defied their core values, these are the silent wounds that often go unacknowledged, unhealed. This human cost, rarely factored into the grand calculus of victory, is arguably the most devastating legacy of such clandestine endeavors. As we move towards a conclusion, it becomes clear that the lessons of Operation Chimera are not confined to a specific historical event. They are universal, resonating through every conflict, every instance where power is wielded in the shadows. The questions we posed at the beginning: what price are we willing to pay for victory? What truths are we willing to bury? And what sacrifices are we willing to make, even those that involve our own? Remain as pertinent today as they were then. The fight for truth is indeed never over. It is a continuous process of inquiry, of critical thinking, of empathy, and of unwavering commitment to justice. We must remain vigilant, always questioning, always seeking to understand the full spectrum of human experience, especially in the context of conflict, because only by truly understanding the darkness can we hope to build a future where the light of truth shines brightest, illuminating the path towards a more just and humane world. Join us in this ongoing dialogue. Let us continue to challenge, to question, and to remember. For in remembrance we find not just solace, but the strength to ensure that the sacrifices, both seen and unseen, are never in vain.